at your convenience.
Okay, Kim-san.
Great.
Yeah. Well, Kim-san, do we have any announcements to make before I start officially? Any updates that need to be known? Any updates from the course convener?
We don't have any key update, but maybe I just want to let everyone know that we have another lead trainer, Dr. DB Subedi, and he will join us in the coming sessions. Perhaps I think online session 4. So for this program, please be advised that we have 3 main trainer, Dr. Nico George, Dr. Kira Shields, and also Dr. DB Subedi. So I think it's good to have 3 experts for this program. This is why this program is so good, because you can hear from different perspective, different experience from our trainers. Okay, I think that's all. I just want to let them know. Otherwise, we do not have any key update.
Okay, thanks, Kim-san. The other thing is, just while we're on just on bureaucracy and things like that, Moani, it seems that Rathia can't get into the folder. Is anybody else having difficulty accessing the folder with the resources?
We do, actually. It's I think, like I mentioned before, if we have to access it through Moani link, so some of us may try to access it through our online drive. So if we go to our online drive directly, we get an error message. We cannot access it. So we have to go back to Moani share folder link to be able to access it, and which is quite annoying because we cannot access it like one click from our online drive from our laptop. So we have to always go back to the link. And sometimes some of our participant computer, maybe the setting, when they click the link, it goes through their online drive. So that's why they get error. Yeah, I don't know how to fix it.
Okay.
To make it easier.
Well, I mean, ideally, we could also just send you the link and the attachments, and you could forward them via email, Kim-san, if that's instead of just going through the shared folder. That might also work. I'm not sure. Because all the links should be open access anyway. So.
Yeah, I actually can download the document and drop it in the group Telegram, which is very easy for me to do. But the thing is, I want everyone to be able to access to the share folder so that they can have everything in one place. So I'm reluctant to do this as well,
Okay.
But if I keep dropping the document on the group Telegram, then the share folder is not relevant anymore,
Okay.
So I although we have some technical issues, but I think we should still use it and try to get familiar with it and try to find to fix the problem, so that they can get familiar with this and access to everything in the share folder.
Okay, so I'll leave that with you, Kim-san, then. Is that okay to try and resolve some of the issues? Would that be okay? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I think not everyone has this problem. I think it just maybe 4 or 5 of us, have this problem.
Okay. Well, Rathia has, and Pubs, but then Marong, Vedak. Yeah, okay. So some people are having access problems, but others are using it, and it seems to be fine. So maybe just if those who are having trouble while we're talking on administration, to either email Kim-san and Moani, is that okay? And then from there we can try and work out ways of resolving it, because it's important, as Kim-san said, to be able to access that folder, because it means you've then got a folder of all the materials all collected and collated into one, which would be really beneficial. So okay. Any other administration things before we move on, given we're in week 3? Anything else we need to just touch on before we get into the heart of literature reviews?
Mhm. Maybe after this, because I can still see that some people still have problem to access to the share folder. I will write them, like provide tips, you know.
Yep.
And maybe a few email still need to be added. Yeah, maybe mistype the email or make the email get error or something like that. So I may send a few email to Molly to add to the share folder. Yeah, for the access.
Okay, thanks, Kim-san. Okay, good. So we'll just check in next week and see how well it's been utilized, if that's okay, and see if we need to do something else. Because next week,
Yes.
DB and Nicole will have a couple of readings for next week's module.
Mhm.
Okay, great. So it then brings me to this week's module, which is literature reviews. And oh, sorry, I just saw the Moani's text there. So, so literature review. So I'm assuming that all of you, in some capacity, have done a literature review, if not 80% of you, given that you've all studied somewhere in the past, either as undergraduates or as postgraduates. Some of you, in fact, a lot of you, being Australian Awards alumni, have done some study in Australia. And all of that has involved at some point what we would consider a literature review. Literature reviews, on the one hand, can be quite interesting. On the other hand, they could be particularly dry and boring. If I was to say to my students, "Hey guys, we're going to today. Can you we're going to do a research project." And in fact, I'll talk a little bit on this in more detail in a second. But if we did a research project and you have to do a literature review, most of my students would go, it sounds very dry, Kirill. It's very boring, even though they do it anyway as part of the research. The idea of doing a literature review is not really what's at the forefront of people's minds when they're doing research. What they want to do when they're doing research is to write something new, to write something that's adds to the dialogue within whatever cohort you're in, add something unique. But as part of that, you have to know where you stand in relation to others. And this is where the literature review is key and essential. So often, the very first thing you do before it maybe even possibly you actually come up with a research question or a research thesis is you start to read. And you read and you read and you read. And from that, you get a sense of what others have said in the past, dating all the way back to the very beginnings of maybe the foundations of your own study and what they're saying now. And you get a sense of how this has progressed over time, how the study has progressed over time, who said what, why they said what they said, but most importantly, how is it that your positioning is unique? So this is what you really want from a research project, to sort of offer something that's either unique or shows an understanding what others have said before, and you're just rephrasing it in a particular way. Now, when you're an undergraduate student, really what you're doing is just regurgitating other people's work and showing that you're having an understanding of it. When you get to a master's research level or to a PhD level, that's when your own work has to be unique and to say something that nobody else has said. So you have to be pretty sure that you know what those other people have said. And that's the importance of a literature review. So I did say on the one hand, a literature review can actually be quite fun. And by that, I mean you get a chance to read, sit and read. But the downside to it is often what you have to read are scholarly articles, peer-reviewed, preferably scholarly articles, which means it's quite dry. So on the other hand, the kind of the boring part of it is you have to read long and turgid scholarly articles. And I'm going to propose ways of mixing it up and making it a bit more exciting in a second. Plus, you also have to understand what's in it and position yourself in relation to those people. And then there's the tedious work of documenting that. That is making sure that your bibliography, your citations are all up to date and that you know where these people stand. So when we're talking about putting a literature review together today, we're talking not only on positioning yourself in relation to those scholars, but also you're making sure that you're keeping up with your own reading and you're using this time to put in place all the bibliographic details, because there is nothing worse than getting to the very end of a project and then trying to find all those sources that you read once upon a time, and also adapting those references to suit a particular journal or a particular book type. So you're best to keep on top of it from the very start. So the essence today is to talk to you about where you stand in relation to other people. Talk about then where would you draw your resources from to write your literature review. Then to give an example of how you would reference it. So we practice that, again, quite dry. And then to talk about, firstly, where do you get reference literature from if you can't access it through university databases, for example, which is a topic that came up last week. But secondly, also, what about other sources? I'm talking about literature reviews being based on scholarly articles, but what about YouTube clips? And what then about newspaper articles and so on? Where do you position that? And what's the importance behind ulterior forms of literature that doesn't come out of scholarly articles? How much emphasis do you place on that when doing research? So a lot to cover. It's quite a dry topic. So let me open it up for discussion right from the very start. Just get a thumbs up who of you have done a literature review before. And you can just, if you just do that, I think the symbol will come up. Who's done a literature review before? Mono, yes, yeah, good. 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. I'm seeing quite a lot of hands. Okay, so we have some understanding of exactly what we're talking about today. Good, great. Good, I'm seeing more hands come up. I don't know. Let me just take this away and I'll bring up my slides in a second. Okay, great, thank you all. So you have some understanding of it. Has anyone particularly enjoyed writing a literature review? Has anyone said, well, this is something, I enjoyed it a lot. From your experience, what do you like or not like about reading this type of literature and placing yourself within it? Have you enjoyed the experience, or has it generally just been kind of a boring experience and a box-ticking exercise? Any volunteers? Meng Lee,
hi.
yeah, sorry, yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry. This is what I, sorry. Just quickly. I think the literature review, there's part that I like and part that kind of mess with my head when I'm doing it.
Yeah.
So because the joy of doing the literature review is the fact that you have a topic that you like and you are interested in, and then you go to what has been out there and what has been found and talked about the topic that you like. So when you go through those documents and those reading, you kind of like have that light bulb moment of
Yes.
of like, oh, this have been found. Oh, this is what I, think this confirm my hypothesis. This confirm my belief. Things like that have popped up. The headache part is the parameter and the scope and how you structure it and how you get the idea organized. Like for me personally, I tend to get excited about this information that I found, but then I find it hard to get it organized into structured idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it Rotveti? Sorry, did I say your name?
Vattai in short, Vattai.
Vattai, sorry, Vattai. Yeah, that's exactly what it is, right? It's great to research, but it's really difficult then to condense that down to something that's manageable, and that's something we all struggle with. So that's a really good insight. Meng Lee and then Rado. Meng Lee?
So personally, I think literature review is how we're gonna find the framework or like something we're gonna interpret again. So personally, if I have to do that, if I gonna collect data or anything, I must have something I interpret again. Like I just cannot say thing randomly because like in other words, I learned what concept what we call systematicity, right? That is what your data have to be, regic have to follow some system so that your analysis gonna become meaningful and you can also channel solution like in the discussion part from it. Actually, I see it more like a link from literature review, funding, and then discussion. So I don't see it as a separate part, but somehow they really overlap and like become systematic. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Meng, that's a good observation. In fact, if you see often in just in the setting out of assignments or thesis, sometimes they do have a literature review section, but sometimes they also, as you said, it becomes just part of the discussion. They incorporate it and we incorporate it, and they say such and such says this, but I say that as part of my overall discussion. Yeah, good observation. And Radha as well.
Yes, so for me, I had some very, very good experience because I got to learn a lot what is happening, what is have done, and also doing a lot of research to read, all the topic that I really that I enjoy. But
Yeah.
also I found the challenges how to make it. The more I read, the more too broad, and I try to narrow down. And also this part where the sources that you read that really good for your research question, but it's not a scholarly, it's not a research article. And I have to put there, it's like a book or something that like Cambodian would like to do, and you grown up, you actually know this is been practicing there, but there's no research have done. And it was hard for me to put it into literature review.
Yeah.
To make it like, because it have to start somewhere, but it was struggle. So I think that's a part where I struggle, but I know this is something very, very important piece of information that need to be there, but it was hard because it's not a research article that I can quote or put it there, something like that.
Yeah, thanks, Rod. That's really interesting. So, well, let me just get back to you in a second, but Sehak, sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly.
So for my part, I think folks here have already mentioned a lot of the common thing that the literature review that I also struggle with. But one thing that I also want to raise with the struggle with doing literature review is also that it's also very crucial that me as a researcher, I'm able to present a balanced view of the existing literature that I am reading. So whenever I have to do literature review and read past academic papers, I have to make sure specifically that I do not conduct it selectively. I have to know that I'm not doing selective interpretation of those findings of the literature. And also I have to avoid personal bias as much as possible. And I mean, it's easier said and done, but with reading a lot of literature review for a certain period of time, it's something that we need to commit to. Thank you.
Yeah, Sehak, thank you. That's all those things, as you said, it's easier said than done. Radha, you had your hand up again. Did you just, or was that from the last?
Sorry, I should just put it down. Sorry.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, so let me just talk about the way the institutions work. And this is something my undergraduates struggle with. It speaks to some of the considerations you've talked on here. A university degree, or the life of a university at universities begins with an undergraduate degree, traditionally to a master's degree, sometimes in research, but it ends in, it could be first in coursework, then research, and then ends in a thesis. And my undergraduate students struggle with literature reviews for those very reasons that all of you have spoken about here. Like, how do you come up with something original? How do you position yourself? How do you not make it too broad? So when you get to the master's stage, this is where you start to hone those skills. You start to actually get a sense of what it is you're doing and how you're going about doing it, with help from colleagues, of course, and university professors and elsewhere. And it's not too broad. So by the time you get to your PhD, and even then you can struggle and try not to make it too broad, given that a PhD is actually a very narrow piece of study, even though it's 50 or 60,000 words in thesis, but it's a very narrow piece. From there, you've actually have some of those skills that you're talking about. You're actually able to narrow it down. But it does take a long while. It's not an immediate thing. It's not instinctive, I don't think. So you practice it. You don't do so well at undergrad. You get a better sense at master's, which is the level that most of you are at. I know some of you have PhDs, but then from the PhD process forward, you get a better understanding. And really, it's only after you've done that thesis, I think, and you start to publish in journal articles that you get a better understanding of it. But it does take some time. So it's a learned thing. It's something that does take time. And part of today, of course, we're not going to cover all those three stages, but to give you some insight, personal insight, but also generic insight into how to face some of those problems, how to get over some of those hurdles. And I think the aim will be, by the time we get to our workshop in Phnom Penh, you guys will have identified a couple of articles, if not 3 or 4 articles, that do the very thing you want them to do, which is to position you and your research in a way that shows that you have something unique, but also it's not too broad and it's not too difficult to handle. It's a manageable research quest that you're on, because you've identified the literature that speaks to that quest. So great, thanks everyone. So let me go to my slides. Oh, just there's a you say, I'm sorry, I cannot, I have a concern about the distinction from my personal view and the literature engaged. How should we deal with this concern? Thanks. And that was spoken, Shiak also talked about bias and personal bias, and how do you make sure that that's not part of what you're writing? Well, firstly, take note that when you're doing research, it is your own ideas. It is kind of you're taking a stand. You're sort of saying, this is what I believe. And you're putting a flag in the sand and saying, here's what I think is going on. Now, you have to substantiate that, which is what the literature does. And so, yeah, you do need a personal view on it, but you also have to make sure that others kind of agree with your position, so it's not too radical, that it's not going to be substantiated, and there's proof in how you're positioning it. So, for example, to talk on, at this point in time in history, a problematic argument in my world, which is genocide prevention and atrocity crimes prevention, a lot of my colleagues at the moment are arguing that the atrocities committed in Gaza by the Israeli government are genocide. So they've planted their flag in the ground, but to do it, they've gone back to substantiate their claims legally, culturally, through the work of the person who founded the idea of genocide, which is Raphael Lemkin. So they have a lot of history and a lot of legal texts and a lot of other sort of scholarly texts to substantiate what they're saying. So it's unique, it's kind of controversial, but they make sure that they have enough knowledge there to be able to substantiate where their argument is. If you get up and just say it's genocide, but I don't know why, you're in a fix, you're in a problem, because it's a very problematic position to take. It's a difficult one to take. It's also controversial, and you have nothing there to substantiate. So you do need that personal, you need something personalized in it. You do need to take a stance, and that's what you have to argue, but you have to make sure that you have enough substantiation, scholarly substantiation, and elsewhere to then help sort of build your argument, to say, I'm drawing on this and I'm drawing on that. So that's there. So in terms of it, you do need something personal, but then you don't want it to get, too crazy and just be a rant. You need to then keep coming back to that literature and saying, oh, I agree with this scholar, but I think I'm going to interpret it slightly differently. So there's always a personal aspect. Okay, so with that, listen, I don't want to talk too much. I've got a lot of slides, but I'm going to stop. I'm going to do a slide or a couple of slides and then come back into the room if that's okay. So it's just not me talking too much. And we've got a few exercises to do. So let me just share my slides, and they're up in the share folder. Moani put them up before. Sorry, let me just bring this up. Can you see this? Can everyone just see this, my screen?
Yep, all good, Carol.
Thanks, Moani. Thank you. Okay. So the question we're answering today is writing literature, how, literature review, how, and why. So first I want to acknowledge, as we've done in the past, traditional owners of the land on which I'm seated, and just to pay my respects to their ancestors and descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. It's a very important thing to do here in Australia, and to recognise the valuable contribution of our Indigenous community to Australia and to global society more generally. So this is the objectives for today, and this will then bleed into other modules as well. So it won't just stop here. In fact, I think we're going to find a connection between last week's Nicole's talk on how to organize research and how to come up with the research question, all the way through all the modules here, and then into the work in Phnom Penh So what we're going to be doing is build an understanding of the purpose of a literature review, which we've already touched on, why do it. Then build some skills in developing a literature review. And I've actually, Moani put up a template that I've adopted from a course that I teach for undergraduates that gives you just a basic idea of how you structure a research project. In that case, it's an essay, and I think it was aimed at an essay that's only 2,500 words in length. But it really, the idea is it still holds, and we'll go through that. We'll do an exercise from that in a little while. If you can outline part A, that'll lead into part B and lead C, and then you get an understanding of where you situate yourself. So that helps develop some skills. We're going to talk on access to resources because that was mentioned last week, how it's very difficult in some institutions or lack of institution in Southeast Asia. This is something that I have a conversation with colleagues all the time with in places like Indonesia, Thailand, and elsewhere, now also in Cambodia, where resources are quite difficult to get. So the question is, well, if you can't locate them within an institution, if they're not available through a university or universities within your region, if UQ, for example, don't allow you access to their libraries, even though I think they do as an alumni, but I'm not quite sure. Is that right, Moani? Does anyone get access to libraries?
For UQ, yes, alumni can have an access, yeah. But it's a
Okay.
limited access, yeah. Not
Yeah, and that,
latest publications or book rental or those kind of services are not included, yeah.
Okay, so there's a limit on what you can do. So that's also restrictive as well. So then the question is, well, how best to locate sources if you can't actually go to those ones that are preferred? Like, it's very difficult. And one of the things that scholars are doing, it's also a money-making one for the journal itself. They ask you when you publish, do you want to pay for it to be open access? And you can then contribute money to it to then have it open access to everyone, which is where I got that article from that was up in the folder today. But it's problematic. And there's, I run a journal that prides itself on being open access to everyone and so anyone can take any of the work and use it in a scholarly way. That's one of the remits of the journal. That is to say that it's open access, and we pride ourselves on that. Others don't do it like that. And if it's published by a certain company, then they ask for money. You pay them to have it open access to compensate them financially, because normally they would get paid through the library system every time a scholar opens up one of their articles. So if it's not open access, there's a monetary access that needs to be paid by the universities or by the libraries every time you access it. So that's restrictive as well. We can talk about how do you get around that. Lastly, the dot point here is do an exercise on how to build skills to interpret the value of research, and we'll be using that platform. It's just a really basic one to begin. You guys will have done this exercise probably in the past, where I'll get you to try and find something in your area of research, in your area of interest, and to see how you position yourself in relation to that. Okay, very basically, what is a literature review? So I'm just going to go through dot point by dot point and go through about 3 slides before I stop and hand it back over to you, if you don't mind. So firstly, it's a survey. This is what it is, a survey of the research that's relevant to your own particular research. So for those of you in agronomy, in pedagogy, for those of you who are looking at things such as health, then you'll have your own sort of go-to areas of research, and you'll know where those are. So you've already positioned yourself. So you'll also know those people who've published a lot in it. So it's a survey, and then as we said before, you then take a stand and position yourself within that survey. So a literature review discusses studies of similar empirical research that have been developed in the past and up to the present. And it's also really important. One of the things that a thesis does, a PhD thesis does, is it allows you to go back in time to look at how the research has developed, which is also kind of key if you want to be an expert in your field. So it gives you that ability to go, oh, in this particular study, this is how it started, and this is how it's transformed over time. And this is where I see myself in that. And this is why I see myself as a contemporary rather than someone who's based in the past. Or I base myself in the sort of methods of the past and my reasons for it. So you get to get an understanding of where you are in that trajectory. It engages with theories and methods that are relevant to your research topic, and every one of us will have a different approach, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, for example. You'll have a different approach. The theories associated with your particular study, so in literary theory, which is some of my background, there's so many different approaches you can take, whether it's colonialism, post-colonialism, gender studies, post-structuralism, whole lot of different ways of reading. Marxism, you can, and so there's a whole lot of different ways. So where do you see yourself in terms of those theories, in terms of, and in my case, in terms of the literature you read? Then just also take note that you compare and contrast existing relevant studies. So you may step outside of your own frame and to somebody else's, their academic or scholarly frame, just to get a sense of where you sit in relation to other existing relevant studies. So if, for example, in my field, and I was in genocide studies, then I could step out of it and look at human rights, I could look at international relations, I could go into things such as visual politics, which has some bearing on the things that I do, but isn't particular to what I'm sort of researching. So that gives me an idea of what others are saying and how they're saying it. And it's important to know how they're saying it as well. And then the last point, which I've sort of been hammering home, is it demonstrates how your own work will be situated in relation to that. So you need to know where you stand. Okay, so that's basically what a literature review does. And we've already signaled that. So we've got that under our belt. We've got it. Next thing is then, and it speaks to that, I'm just moving my screen around, what is the purpose of a literature review? Sorry, I just saw a chat up. That's all right. So the purpose of a literature review, I've limited to 5 dot points here, but you could probably come up with more. 1, again, just to go over something we've already said, it provides context for your research. So again, it situates your research in a particular time, place, in a particular theory, in a particular cohort of scholars. Secondly, it justifies the significance of your research problem, your research puzzle, or your research question. So some would argue that before you start your literature review, you have an idea of what your research is, where you situate, well, what your research topic is going to be. And maybe sometimes you'd even have a research essay question or research question already at hand. But sometimes it doesn't work like that. Sometimes you have to know where you sit before you can come up with a research question. So some of the questions you would ask in relation to that is, what is known about your topic already? What is, and key to that is also what is unknown. So you're trying to find something unique in amongst all these studies. You have some inkling of it already, and those of you who work on the ground in whatever field it is would know that here's an approach to something that I've discovered, but do people theoretically know about it? Or what about people in other countries? Are they doing something different? So what is unknown about your own particular topic? Third, it helps you to refine and to justify your topic. So you have to be able to argue it. And you have to say, for those of you who are doing a thesis, at the very end of the thesis, you do a viva or a viva, where you justify and argue your point. And it takes you 5 years to get to that position. Well, the literature review helps you get to that point 5 years on, where you have to defend your thesis, where you have to justify your topic. And the dot point, it says your puzzle or question may alter as you develop your literature review and understand more about your research field. This happens all the time. You start out with a research question, a proposal, you think you found something that's unique, and then you come across resources as you're reading that actually say the same thing as you're saying, and you go, what? That's my idea. So how then do you reshape it, become your idea? How do you take something from it? And this is where you start, once you start to really delve into it and get an understanding of where everyone's positioned, this is where you might change and alter your literature, your puzzle or your question or your problem significantly multiple times. In a thesis, a PhD thesis, that happens all the time. You spend 2 or 3 years reading, and then eventually you come up with something that you realize is unique based on what your interests are. And from there, you start to write it. It may not take that long, but you could change it quite significantly over time, depending on feedback. So point number 4, The literature review will critically review previous studies to your own. So you don't have to do the critical reviewing yourself. It's often done for you. And so you can say, that's what they're saying about this certain approach. And then from that, you also get a sense of, as I say, the next point, how did they develop their findings? So the methods that they've employed, and this is also key. You have to know what other people have done and the methods they've employed to get to the point where they've published something. And you can adopt it, or you could say it doesn't work for me. So I've mentioned in the past, you've got qualitative or quantitative research. Generally, you're either one or another. You're into numbers, you're into Excel spreadsheets, or you're into reading the text and delving into the text themselves, for example, quantitative versus qualitative. And both of those take different approaches, and sometimes there's a melding of the two, but you could adopt one, adopt the other, depending on how other people have discovered and developed their findings. You may take up a position and it speaks to your own studies, and you only get to learn about this by reviewing what others have done. Now, point number 5, a literature review allows you to justify the project design you've developed for your own study. So when you get up at the end of a PhD and you have to defend it, you have to justify why you've developed your study the way it's, and why have you gone down that particular pathway. So the question is, how is your project positioned in relation to what is known and unknown in the literature that exists that is relevant to your topic, which is what I sort of said right from the very start. So let me just forward on one little slide. Let me just go one slide further on. Very basic, sorry, and we'll come back as a group after this slide. The next question, the big overarching question, is then how do we conduct a literature review? So we've talked on what is a literature review, we've talked on the purpose of doing a literature review, and then how do we do a literature review? Well, or why do we conduct a literature review, sorry. So, and we'll get to how we do it in a second. So again, I'm being a little repetitious here. Firstly, you show mastery of your field of research. So you have to show that you can do research. So not just that you are researching a particular topic, that you can do research. It's not quite as easy as many think. It's actually quite tedious. It can be quite a difficult thing to do research. Again, the dot point that speaks to the other points I've made, you consider what other researchers say about the social, political, and economic environment. They'd be relevant to your study. So all 3 things you have to consider. And then you consider what other researchers say about the problem you're investigating. So you may get feedback through it. It helps you to develop your framework, and we'll get to that in a second. It helps you justify your findings. And then the question is, do your findings concur with those in other studies? Have you found something unique? And it helps you to develop a new perspective on your study. So it kind of speaks to what I've already said in the past. Let's get out of this then for now. I'm just going to stop share and bring us back into the room. Great, thank you. And I'm curious to know, because you all have research topics and you all have an idea of what you'd like to research. Just in relation to what I've put up there on the board, and Moani, this could be a little bit last minute, but is it possible to do a Padlet now, or is it too difficult to do Padlet?
I need to figure it out. I haven't tried one before, Kirill.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I just sort of might be a nice way, but we can use the chat anyway. So I'm just interested to know from each of you where you situate yourselves in terms of your research. And the first question is, who's at the fore of your research? Like, who do you think are the go-to people that you would read up on? So in my field, say I was looking at Holocaust studies or something like that, which is, or Holocaust literature, which is where I sort of work and I'm writing on, I would say this person, and this person. These are relevant to what I'm writing on at the moment. I would say, for example, Michael Rothberg. I would say something like Stuart Taberner. I would say something like Erin McGill or something like that. So I'd have my ideas of where I would go to. Are you guys at that point? Do you know where you would start? Who you would read first? Anyone? Who? And I won't know them, but it'll be an exercise. Can you just put down in the chat 1, 2, or 3 persons within your field that you would go to and their writings? Just put it up in the chat if you could. Oh, Meng Li. Yeah, Meng Li. You've got a hand up. Yeah, Mono, good. Youth activism, social media, Sophia Young. Great. Thanks, Mono. Good, good. Anybody else? Rada, thank you. Dr. Vanna Booth and Dr. Buna and Dr. Sarif, thank you. Thank you. Astrid Nora Nielsen, thanks, Mono, as well. Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's good. Next one, Lena. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Yep. Good. And if you don't have a specific person, yeah, Meng Li, we can't hear you. Sorry, no. Anybody else? Who else has anybody got any idea of who they might turn to? Meng Li, we still can't hear you. Sorry if you're trying to say something. Good. Okay, thanks, Boon. Yeah. Meng Li, neuroscience educator. Yep, yep. So you've gone to. Okay, that's okay. Yeah, great. If you can keep going and put down in the chat where you would, I'll have a read of them as we keep going. So this is part 1 of our what we're trying to aim for today. This is part 1 of what we're going to be doing in terms of the sheet that I sent out. Thanks, Somni. Great, thank you. Keep writing in if you can. What I'm hoping to do is to fill in that sheet partly, the one that I was sent around. So let me just bring it up in front of us. I'll share it. Where is it? Can you, Moani, do you mind just letting me know if you can see that on screen? Great. So this is a basic research essay plan that I put together or have adapted from another course.
Can you zoom in a little bit? It's the font is still tiny for us. Yeah, good.
Does that work? Okay, let me just move over. Yep. So a basic research essay plan is something that I've just put in place to help my students with, firstly, developing a research question, and then from there, trying to find 3 critical sources that help substantiate what they're going to say. So I don't know where we're at. I don't know where we got to last week, but let's see how we go. What I'm hoping for is that each of us can sort of, maybe we don't have a working title as yet, and maybe we don't have a 1-sentence thesis statement. That may become later. So you would say, this report will argue, my position will argue, my essay, if you want to make it an essay, will argue. And this is really basic stuff for those of you who have already taken some time and been part of a postgraduate program. And for those of you who are already academics as well. And then from there, you get this sort of essay plan that clearly describes, I say in 3 to 5 numbered succinct sentences, what you're going to say. So dot points that can elaborate the content, and you don't need to include introduction or conclusion, just the important stages. But we're going to skip to here, point number 4. 3 critical sources you plan to use to substantiate your particular argument. So what we're looking for is 2 to 3 dot point sentences for each of the articles you use, outlining what their key argument is, how this article or this document will help your argument. It gives insight into the author's credibility. So this is what I'm asking already. Where would you go? Who would you go to? And why do you think they're credible? What is it that gives them their credibility? And how is it that your argument differs to what's here or there, depending on where you draw your resources from? And then the last point, which is key, the bibliographic details of those 3 sources. So I say to my students straight away, start writing those in straight away, as whether it's through MLA referencing, APA referencing, Chicago referencing, get used to it and put it in straight away. So what we're going to be doing just in a second, and we don't need to do it now, but we'll do it as in sort of a breakout room in a group in a second, is to not look at 3, but to find one critical source, and then to find, well, firstly, what's the author's credibility? Why that author? What's their key argument? And how this argument will help, how this article will help your own argument and how it differs. So keep this in mind. So I'm asking this particular question about who you would go to for a particular reason, because that's easiest. Straight away, you know the experts, you know where they lie, you know their institutions, then you can find their work and their papers and their books, and that takes you directly to the sort of scene of the crime. But I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Right, I'm just reading everyone's responses. Thank you. So it shows to me that you guys have already have positioned yourself in relation to some others already. So that's great, and you know where to go. The difficulty is, and this brings us to a group exercise. I'm bringing up my slides again. Where do you locate appropriate materials? So this is here in response to something that you guys said last week, which is I find it difficult to find resources. So just very briefly, of course, you guys will know this, but when looking for literature to review, ideally you would go to scholarly articles that are peer reviewed. So if I talk on just to give you sort of an anecdote on why it's important to have them peer reviewed, in the journal that I run, and I can bring the link up, the peer review process is quite brutal. So people will submit their articles, professors, undergrads, or not many undergrads, but postgrads of some sort, people who research in this particular field. And they send it in, and I read it, and then I get 2 more of the editorial board to read it. So that's 3 internal reviewers. And we all write reports and say, does it go forward to an external review, or does it not? Does it actually get rejected? So with 3 opinions, most of them get rejected at internal review. So that straight away we say there's a problem with it. Your argument is not substantiated enough. There's not enough in here for it to be published. Just go to the chat, sorry. Oh, sorry, Pav. I'll get back to your question in a second. I'm not sure what you're saying, but I'll just talk on the process of why it's important for a peer review. And so that's the first step. The second step is if they get through internal review, they go to external review, and they go for a blind peer review, so they don't know who it is. So we reach out to experts in the field. They say, yes, I can review it. They have 3 months to read it. That's a long time. 3 months to read it and to write a detailed report. And then it comes back and they say, yes, you should publish. No, you shouldn't publish. Yes, you publish with major revisions. Yes, you publish with minor revisions. And as I said in the first week, in fact, the number of people that get through all of that is very small. It's only about 10%. Only about 10% to 20% of submissions actually get published, not even 20%, 10%. Most of them get rejected at the internal review. If they go to external, sometimes they do get rejected again. Mostly they want changes made. So it's quite brutal. So, but ultimately what you get then at the very end of that process, after changes have been made as per external review suggestions, is a really strong article. And that's why peer review material is really key to writing a really good research literature review, because they've already, all the ones that don't matter, all the ones that are problematic have already been culled. And so you're getting some really strong scholarship. So that's your first port of call, is those peer reviewed data, but you access them through databases. Ideally, which are found in library repositories or via library membership and databases. As I said, I've got colleagues that work at UGM and Chula universities and other universities in the region, and those students that are there don't have as much access to all those repositories as we do here at UQ. So, and as alumni, you do get, as Mwani said, some access, but not whole access. So it's a bit difficult. So the question then is, if they are unavailable, if you can't get them through these libraries, where do you go? Well, Google, as I said, and you know this is really a first go, and that's only because some academics, as I mentioned before, pay to have their work open access. So they've paid generously, you know, probably out of their own pockets, to allow their work to become open access, even though it's in a peer-reviewed journal article. Now, you then have to assess the quality of the article. You have to look at and who publishes it to get an idea of its credentials. But that's where you would go. Anything outside of that, anything that sort of sits in this world that's not in a reputable journal and it's not been published by a reputable publisher, becomes problematic, because it probably hasn't been through that review process. And there's a lot of what they call vanity publishing. Vanity publishing is where academics and others pay. They actually pay the publisher to have your articles put up there. So there's no scrutiny given to it, and they could be saying anything about anything. So this is where you start to get yourself into some difficulty. So be careful of that and try to make that distinction between those that are open access, and open access because of out of the goodness of the academic heart, and those that are actually vanity publishing. Another option is sometimes, if you get access, I didn't know you can get membership in overseas libraries sometimes, depending on what the library allows. So in some American library institutions, they give you access no matter where you're from. So you can find those libraries, but they're kind of rare. As part of the alumni, you get access to the university resources. But where else? And here I'm going to firstly maybe just stop share. And Pav, you had a question about something, and then I'm going to move over to you guys to see where else can you find materials, and is there a dark web that we can go to that I don't know about? Where do you guys find your materials if you can't access it? So Pav, what's your question first? Pav Sue, are you there?
I think he cannot talk. He mentioned earlier that he is in office, so he is typing. Yeah.
I'm not sure the question is that the supplied journal article. No, that's okay, Pav. Are you suggesting that the journal article that I supplied is reviewed? It should be, given the reputation of the journal itself. It's open access, and it's just a really broad overview article. It's actually an article that just gives you guys further insight into what a literature review is. So it's not really scholarly in the sort of stricter scholarly sense, but it would have gone through an editorial process review. If I don't know if I've actually answered your question. But over to you guys as a group, where do you find your resources? Where do you go to? Is there somewhere I don't know where you can find access to and this is just to open it to everyone to say, hey, I can find articles in this place via this medium. Where do you go to if you don't have access to the sort of databases that are available from some institutions? Yeah, Google Scholar. ResearchGate, good, Mengley. ResearchGate, exactly. Google Scholar, thank you. Anybody else? Fanak, go to friends who are still at university. That's perfect. These are all the things that I wasn't allowed to put down on my slide that you should. Yep. Social Science Research Network. Good, good. Thanks, Kim Sun. That's great. I don't know what they're called, but I do know Sci-Hub, but limited social science. Thanks. Yeah, Mwani, that's true. Springer, yeah, you can go straight to the actual, sometimes to the, that's hard. I mean, I don't know if Springer gives access mainly to everything, do they? Maybe they do.
So Not everything, but we can go there, download the DOI, and go to sign up once again.
Good. Yeah, good. Okay, there's ways around it. Yep, good. Any other ways of JSTOR? Yeah, thanks, Moron. Oh, thanks, right. Mainly, you need to improvise. Yeah, this is exactly it. So thanks, Mingli. Yeah, thanks for ResearchGate. Yeah, so the point that and sorry, I just let others speak before I speak too much. Yeah, thanks, Siniat. Sage, yep. There was I have friends who download videos. The dark web, desperate move. Yeah, this is what I'm sort of getting at. Like I because I'm not actually, because I have access, and I've always sort of had access because I've been part of this institution or other institutions like this now forever. I don't know the processes of getting this sort of access through the dark web, but there probably is ways and means of getting it. Like, I'm not supporting it. I'm not sort of not saying don't get it, but I'm just saying that there is that possibility, because I do know, friends of mine who go looking for videos or TV shows or music can somehow get it through other multiple sources where they don't have to pay for it. So, rather, I never know that we can find our scholarly research out from the dark web. No. Oh, here we go. Scholarly articles unavailable. I use credible websites to search for documents related to the sector, such as local. Yep, good. Library membership. Good. All different ways of being able to approach this. Yeah, that's really good. I mean, most institutions, such as the UN, for example, publish everything. All their reports will be up there and it'll be out of transparency. And that's good because we pay a hell of a lot of tax, your country, our countries, towards institutions like the UN to put that up there. And different institution publication on the website. Yep, good. Yeah, if you a Department of State, Meng Li, is that gonna remain? Because this is where you start getting institutions like DFAT stepping in and taking over and funding these sort of initiatives, which are really important. OECD, yep. Yeah, so what this shows is that there are ways and means of getting the sort of articles that you'd like and need. So Kim said it's unethical and amount to stealing. There's always, definitely problems to it. But as you said, like, there are other ways of getting it. So the US Department of State, if they provide free institutional access to JSTOR and others, then that's enough to get you not only started, but well underway in terms of trying to find your research literature. Great. Okay. So we've got different ways of approaching it. And different ways of knowing how to get the sort of access that we need, and that's great as well. And I like the ones that you can reach out to friends who are always are still at uni to get them as well. Good. So that means two things. We have an understanding of some of the people that we'd like to work on or work with. We have an understanding of where they're situated, and we have access and ways of getting this. We have means of getting this scholarship. We know how to find certain databases through certain pathways. So that's great. Two things to consider. So let me just share my slides again. Now I can't remember which I'm using, but okay. Can you see that, everyone? Marty, is that okay? Good, thank you. And there's a chat. Sorry, let me just go to the chat. Ming Li, thank you. Yep, great. Okay, so good. And maybe one of the things that we can do if we have problems accessing this material is we can talk about it more in Phnom Penh and put together kind of a list of ways to get this materials through, ethical ways of getting this material. And then also to think about then where governments can step in, where DFAT can step in or something like that to provide access, given the emphasis and onus is on making sure that Cambodia and other regional countries have as much access as is possible to do as much research as they're hoping. So we can think that through. But great, there are ways and means of getting there anyway. And sometimes it's about improvising, right? Just going with what you can and hoping that you know, through friends, colleagues, that type of thing, you get what you can. I have friends reach out to me looking for particular things every now and then and say, can you access it through the library? And I can as a PDF and send it on. So that always helps. That always helps. Okay, so there are sort of theoretically stages to the development of this literature review, and I've got a number of them here. So the first stage is something that Nicole talked on last week. She said, talked on research and preliminary questions and where you start your research and what research is, but really a clearly defined area of research. So what's your research focus and what's your preliminary question? All of you came with a preliminary question and research focus when you applied to this. So you've already got that there in place. So you kind of know the sort of pathway you're taking, you know the area, and you know roughly where your expertise or even maybe your problem and your puzzle is at this particular point, what's unique about your particular research. So you may already have that in place or the makings of it. Second, as we've been saying, sort of makes sense. Well, the next stage is to find relevant sources. So you can't read everything. Key number one, and you don't want to read everything. In fact, most of the time, what most students will do is you'll just read the abstract of not everything. And from there, you'll get an idea of whether it fits your agenda or not. So as I say, you have to be selective and work out what sources are going to be most useful to you. And there are some ways of doing this. I'm sure that you've all encountered this along the way, and you have your own tools in your own toolbox to do it anyway, but just some general things. Start with some very introductory readings just to get a stance of where you are. And even I go so far as just to go to things like Google, YouTube, anything like that that gives you a very general introductory starting point. So my students, when they come to me and say, oh, Kirill, I'm going to write a paper on, for example, I'm going from my own expertise, the Rwandan genocide, where do I start? I say, well, what do you know about the Rwandan genocide? And they say, well, not much. So start there and do things that are a little bit more pleasurable at this point. Maybe there's some documentaries, maybe there's some podcasts, something like that to give you a better understanding. And then from there, go to those books, more generalist books that you can find that are a little easier to read that give you a better understanding. So don't make it too laborious to begin. Have some fun with it and also get to see what others have written on it. So you enjoy it to begin. So then from there, once you've got your sort of general knowledge up to date, and then you can go to some more general scholarly articles. And there are those that are very specific, that have a really specific topic and they have a really specific approach. And there are those that are more historical, those give an overview. They're really useful. The ones that are historical, give an overview, go to those because they generally give you your introductory ideas. Like they provide you with context. So then the first readings might focus on sources that are up to date and current. So go straight to the very things that are topical now. See where you are in 2025 and what people have said about the topic that you're interested in. From that, you can then look at all the reference materials. So one of the most boring things you can do as an academic, and academics go, I love reading bibliographies or I love reading footnotes because that gives you all the work that they've referenced. And from that gives you a little pathway, like little crumbs from the gingerbread house back through the forest that allow you to find your way out of the forest. So it gives you an idea of what others have referenced. And generally what people have referenced, you'll find that it gets referenced over and over again. It's kind of seminal. So if you know the seminal works, that's the most important works, you're in a really good place. So as I said before, when you put down those people that you know well, who fit within your research, they're the ones that are going to get referenced most often. So you follow that trail, and from there you'll come across ideas that are probably more particular and more interesting than you might find elsewhere. So it gives a bit of a sense. So follow the reference trail is what I'd say. The third point here is not to follow any what they were called false leads. You know, those things that are interesting but not relevant. Now, that's not easier said than done because you can go down a rabbit hole, especially if you start on YouTube or something like that. You know, that YouTube rabbit hole where you go down and all of a sudden you've gone off on, you're looking at UFOs and how pyramids are made and all the conspiracy stuff. You can do that also in academia. So make sure you don't go follow any false leads. Things that are relevant. Stay focused and stay relevant. That's the T-shirt for the day. Stay focused and stay relevant, even if other things are more interesting. Fourth, keep track of the data and keep track of the statistics that provide background for your study. So make sure that you can situate it and always keep track of it. And the last point in relation to it, evaluate your sources for credibility and reliability. And we'll do an exercise in the middle, in a second, that at the end of this that speaks to that. So you already have some knowledge of credibility and reliability because you know those experts in your field. But you have to evaluate it yourself. So it comes with peer review, knowing the peer review processes, and so on. The third stage. Sorry, I'll just get some water. The third stage then is to keep very good records. Key to all this, guys, is to keep records of what you're reading. You must cite all the material in your review. So even if, I mean, this is why you don't want to go too far-fetched and go too wide. You want to keep it relevant. You don't want to cite, everything, including the encyclopedia. You want to have it relevant. But once you have that material, you copy full bibliographic details of your reading. And I say that as someone who in the past has had to go back and try and find where I got that literature from. Guessing it's really difficult. So keep it and do it straight away. We'll do an exercise in a second on this. Take notes, including the page numbers. Always make sure, because once you pull out a quote and you can't find it again, you can go to Control F maybe, that could come up with it, but it's tedious and time consuming. So just right from the start, so you know where to find and record your ideas and so on. And you can also create a database of what your summaries are. So you can, if you're really diligent, you'll read it and give a summary and put it into a database, what they would call an annotated bibliography. And that also contains the publication information, key points, and it'll also let you know why it's important to your own work. If you're a terrible book person like me, you will write in your books. I don't think you're allowed to do it, but I do it all the time. And that gives me my key points. So I know where to go back to in the book itself. I didn't tell you to do that. I just do it to the books that I own, not the library books. But you can do that in the book itself. You can do it. Number 4, and this gets a little repetitious, sorry. So this is the fourth stage. Once you've got all that in place, you're looking to develop your analysis. You're looking for common themes and reference points in your readings. What's in common, what's not. Looking for contrasting materials, what's new compared to what the other people have said. You're able to reflect on it. And once you get to a point where you're knowledgeable, you can go, I don't agree with this or not. So that gives you time of reflection. And it also gives you the ability to critically review and identify limitations, deficiencies, problems, with evidence, with methods, and with theories. We'll talk on that again in a second. I might come back to that, and I'm going to stop share before I put everyone to sleep. And let's do at 2:15. Yeah, I'm hoping, Moani, sorry, I know you've gone off screen. I think maybe we can do an exercise now, if that's okay. So what I'd like us to do is to take that sheet that I had before, and hopefully, or you don't need to use that particular sheet, but just use it as a guide, and to try and find one source that speaks to your own research question. So we might break you into breakout rooms first, just to, so I've got a question.
Yes, Kirill,
Yes.
This is Nim speaking. Before we go into the small break room, I have a question.
Good.
Regarding identify kind of credible source. I am in a situation where I develop my research topic and sort of research questions based on the challenge that I witness through my daily work with the communities. And I see the potential to contribute to this, biodiversity conservation sector through in-depth analysis or research. My problem is when it comes to finding literature review or sources to begin with. And in Cambodia, I try to search for the source as part of this exercise that we are going into the small room also. Very little or no kind of like scholarly articles or literature review or studies that relevant to Cambodia. So in this situation, what would be your I'm wondering if you have any advice on this, where to start with, how I can go about it, because I still think this is very important and I want to continue with this research topic in question, although there is very, very limited sources.
Yeah, Nim, thanks. That's a really important question. So one of the things that I should emphasize is that when I'm talking about doing a literature review, it's very academic. I'm proposing an academic way of doing research, which is desk-based, which is basically in the library. So what I'm proposing this way of thinking through a literature review is that we all kind of sit down and read books and we have access to the materials and we write up a literature review and it becomes a scholarly article that we then publish, as all academics do. What I don't consider here, and this is something we're going to talk more on, in giving this very broad and brief overview of a literature review and just keeping it to sort of the world of academia, is I don't consider research projects that are on the ground that have sort of a more tangible, less academic position to take. So if, for example, some of our, I work in a particular sector, a human rights sector, and Mwani's worked into it as well, where we have a lot of projects on the ground. If they want to write those up, generally they don't fall back on literature to then substantiate what they've done. They write it up and say, here's the evidence we've got. We've done a number of sort of case studies on it, and we write it up in a particular way. Not only because this literature review doesn't really work, but because, as you said, Nim, you don't have access if you're out in the field to this sort of relevant materials and writing it up. So you speak to a particular way of doing research that talks what we would call from on the upwards or on the ground type of studies. What they will call in our sort of upstream prevention, I suppose they call it, rather than downstream, which is a different approach to it. So and so in that case, there are different approaches to take. And then what relevance does the literature have then to on-the-ground studies? Well, generally, what we find is that our colleagues are on the ground doing this study and they write a report and here are our findings, and that doesn't always match up with the theory. In fact, those who sit at desks normally theorize and don't have any sort of practical application. So one of the things, if you can do it, a literature review can actually show you just how little academics know about the on-the-ground situation. So that's something interesting in and of itself, and how little application there is to some of their theories. So there's always this sort of discord, sometimes a discord between what's going on theoretically and what's going on practically on the ground. So if your research is centered on that, then this maybe is not as important. But where you find it interesting is the work with someone like Nicole, I suppose, who works in the Pacific Islands, where she does sort of on the ground and then matches it with the theory, and there's a balance between the two. But then again, she has access to this stuff here and access to this stuff here. Whereas if you've only got access to that, then this would privilege over that. Nim, did that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you so much. I think I will reach out to you separately later also to have a more understanding about it. Yeah, but
Well, what we're doing at the moment, Nim, is we're just in this module today. The idea is just to give a really basic overview of understanding of what a literature review, and in terms of like a really traditional academic literature review, and what it does and what it's meant to do and how it's meant to help you research. Later on, though, in other modules, we'll get to non-traditional forms of research and we'll look at how that's done. And I think we'll answer some of your questions in that. In this case, what we're doing is just sort of situating what we're talking about within a particular sort of lens, which is an academic lens. And so what we're going to do is we'll start really kind of, simply, and then from there we'll complicate this as we go on. So when we get to Cambodia and your own research questions, you can say, Kirill, Nicole, DB, you've proposed this sort of pathway to research, but it doesn't work in my particular case. What are the alternate approaches? I don't have access to literature. What are the alternate approaches? How do I approach that? So we will get to that if that's okay, Nim.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. And DB will talk on this more, and we'll also bring in other experiences from working within the region as well. Yeah, that's great. But for now, just to go back to the basic quest, what I was hoping to do, if we could go into breakout, is it easier? I think breakout rooms might be easier, is no, I'm not going to, sorry, Miani, I'm not going to do breakout rooms at this point. I've got another exercise. I'm going to do the breakout room exercise now. Okay, this is what we're going to do. I've reconfigured what I'm going to do just to give it a bit more relevance. So let me go back to my slides, and this is our first exercise before we move on to the more difficult of the two exercises. Well, I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that, and I'll come back to that. Tips. So can you see this? This is our first, whoop, oh dear, what did I do? Did you see can you see the screen, Milani,
Yeah,
now?
we can see well.
What did I do? Oh yeah, okay, got it. Okay, so in a group, I'm going to split you up into groups to do this first exercise. And I'm hoping that I'll leave this up on screen, but also maybe you can bring it up through the resources folder. What we're going to do is discern the value of these different sorts of materials when it comes to writing a literature review. So keep in mind that I am talking here about traditional kind of scholarly publishing, as I just explained to Nim. But we could also talk on different approaches to research. But for now, imagine we're writing a research paper at a university for an undergraduate course, a postgraduate course that is going to go to an examiner or is going to go to a journal and get peer review. So we're going to assess the quality of these particular materials, and we're going to talk about, what value are they? And then we can come back and talk about this in a different way, in a different context, and see whether you would rank them the same way. So we're going to work with colleagues in groups, and we're going to place a number from 1 to 12 on the most reliable source to the least reliable source when thinking through what resources you would use in this particular context: academic writing, writing at a master's level, PhD level, for a journal level. So 1 is the most reliable, and 12 is the least reliable. And these are your choices. So let's move this again. Academic monograph, political leader's speech, a peer-reviewed journal article, a Wikipedia article, academic conference paper, an unpublished academic paper found on an author's personal website. So think about that. An opinion editorial think tank piece, a text of an academic lecture or a seminar presentation, a government YouTube video, a documentary on TV, a report from an NGO, some of you mentioned that before, and then a social media post. So you have to rank them from the most value in this particular context to the least value. Okay. So let me just, I'll bring that up and let me just see what I can do here.
I'll copy and paste those 12 entries at the chat box.
Thanks, Moani. That's great. Thank you. So I might stop sharing this because I can't seem to be able to break into rooms from here. Great. Thank you. Okay. In breakout rooms, if you don't mind, our quest is then to rank that, and then we'll come back and meet in about, it won't take us too long, maybe 10 minutes if at most, and to talk about why you've ranked them the way you have ranked them. And we can dispute, we can have an argument over why. So I'll break us into...
We got 27 participants today.
Okay, let me see what happens. So 5 rooms, 5, is that 5 or 6 persons a room? My gosh, you can tell I'm in the humanities. Okay, not in the maths department. Okay, 5, let me go. And I'm just going to assign you automatically, randomly, and then myself and Moani will just check in and check out. Moani, you might, let me see, how do I then exclude you from this? Okay, maybe I can't.
Exclude the co-hosts, yep. Host and co-host, yeah.
Oh, okay, yep, sorry. Exclude the co-host, yep. Okay, good. Okay, here we go, guys. And are there any questions about the task at hand? No, good. Okay, let's go. Okay. Couple there that maybe not, yeah, great. It's good. So Moani, maybe we'll just like, firstly, I'll just go into each room to see if everybody understands. And I'll give them until 2:35 or something like that.
35, yeah. And Kim-san is always here, also here. He can also help us going around the rooms.
Yeah, Kim-san, is that okay?
Yeah, okay. Which room do you want me to go?
Let me just go around each of them on my own, and then after that, give them 5 minutes, and then, or maybe even let a bit more, and then maybe we can just the rooms again to nominate a speaker. Sorry, Moani, let's go back into the rooms for 2 more minutes.
Oh, 2 more minutes? Oh, okay, yeah.
Because we just have to nominate a speaker for each of the rooms.
Oh, okay.
Formulate your own question, yeah. So, yeah, it's, yeah, I would say the literature of the reading is essential to help formulating your research question, but you need something of a research question or research idea there first for it to progress past that point. Meng Li.
Hello, Kiri. So thank you. So if I remember correctly, in your early slide, you mentioned there are 5 purposes for the literature review, right? My question is like, is it only confined to these 5 purposes, or is still emerging? Like, I mean, like there might be other purposes that literature review might serve, because I believe research is pretty dynamic, right? And if it is still emerging, and how open is the research community toward that? You got my question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Meng Li, I agree. So what I've given in this slide, in this presentation, even though it's been 2 hours, is a really basic overview of the literature review. And as you say, there are other reasons and other purposes for a literature review. And it can be situated within, as you said, more contemporary contexts. So, yeah, there are some really, there are some other more abstract reasons as well to do a literature review. So those 5 points, as to why do it, just give a very basic kind of justification for it. And I suppose when I put the slides together, I was really thinking about, if you're just within a certain context, which is the university context, writing a research paper, this is the 5 reasons you do it. But there are others, Meng Li. And let me put that down as something to discuss in the coming weeks. And just, again, as we become more nuanced in our approach to this. So we really start in a quite binary way, but as we progress, we'll start to come across encounter other ways of thinking it through. Yeah, Meng Li.
Then to what extent do you think the research community, by research community, I mean the scholar, the reviewer, editor to the journal, how open are they to really accepting the new purposes of literature review? Because from my experience, one are not they're gonna throw you back to what they believe should be the standard. You got what I mean?
Yeah, no, actually, I know what you mean. So traditionally, you have this idea of what a literature review, and anything that differs from that, they don't accept, you mean? So it becomes part of just, the institution of scholarship. Is that what you mean, Meng Li? So anything that's different from that?
Yeah. I mean, like, of course, we acknowledge that the field is emerging, dynamic, but somehow, like, do we like how I mean, the extent of our openness toward it is not the same. You got what I mean? I'm not trying to accuse, but I just want to know, like, how open a reviewer or editor to the news method, especially when it comes to review newspaper.
Yeah, it actually depends on the actual kind of submission, I think. I think more people will be more open to it depending on how you approach it. So if in your methodology you state, I'm not looking at, I have some like articles that are peer reviewed, but really I'm doing a study on the way newspapers or something else have situated this. Like if you justify it in your methods and your methodology, it's completely fine. Here at UQ, for example, you can do a traditional PhD and write it with a traditional literature review, but there are other approaches and non-traditional approaches to doing research. And those non-traditional approaches sort of remove you from doing A to B to C to D, the formula. So you can actually apply different methods and have a different approach to a literature review through non-traditional methods, as long as you justify it and you say, my methods are this. So, and that's becoming more and more accepted, mostly within the arts faculties, not so much outside of that, I think, but non-traditional approaches to study are becoming more and more sort of familiar within the university sector. I hope that answered your question. Listen, what I would propose, just in the last, we're not going to do it now, realizing we're over time, but next week we might have a little bit more free space to talk on some of the considerations and concerns and some of the questions. And we can put that together and we can start discussing, again, some of the nuance. So let's take this as an introduction. Here's a literature review. Here are some of the things to consider. Here's how I situate myself. And from here, we start to put this into practice. And in doing so, we say, it doesn't work for me, Kirill. It doesn't work for me, Nicole. It doesn't work for me, DB. And we'll go from there and start to look at alternative approaches to doing research, which is where it starts to get also really interesting. Sorry, guys, I realize we're over time and it was a long session on something that's quite dry. Kim-san, over to you with anything. Kim-san? Is he hearing? He can't hear. He hasn't got his... Kim-san? Yep, Kim-san, over to you, just for closing remarks.
Oh, sorry, I was talking to my colleague.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah, she has
Sure.
something quite urgent to talk. Yeah. So you just finished your closing remark.
So closing, yeah, just to say that next week we talk on qualitative and quantitative data, but we'll also have opportunity to start getting more nuance next week. So, and then work towards that as well, a few more exercises. So over to you, Kim-san.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kira. I think I don't have any important to say now. Except thank you for your wonderful presentations. For today topic literature review. I think it's very important, especially to prepare for the next sections on research method, I think literature review is very important to inform, our research, which method that we are going to use. So I encourage everyone to pay attention on literature review to build your research interest, to sharpen your research interest and narrow them down in order to prepare for following sessions on qualitative and qualitative research method. Because I think until then, we're gonna discuss and we're gonna reflect on our research project. What kind of method that are we going to use, quantitative or qualitative? And you would struggle to answer that if you have not done deeper reading, especially in literature review. So yeah, for any key update, I will do that on next Monday or Tuesday when we hear back from our trainer how to prepare for the next sessions. Okay, thank you everyone. Have a nice weekend. Yeah, anything to add?
Just thank you. Thanks, Mwani, for helping facilitate, and see you next week.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a good
Bye,
weekend.
everyone.
Thank you.